It's official. The White Sox have tied the 1962 New York Mets for the most losses in a 162-game season. Let's discuss, despite tying the record, why it makes the Chicago White Sox the worst team ever. Next on Locked On White Sox.
You are Locked On White Sox, your daily Chicago White Sox podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, I'm your host, Todd Welter, a lifelong Sox fan and the site expert of SouthsideShowdown.com, part of the FanSided Network. Also, I've covered Major League Baseball for outlets such as the Associated Press. And thanks for making Locked On White Sox your first listen every day. We are free and available wherever you get your podcasts and on YouTube, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Make sure to hit the like button on today's episode. Subscribe to the YouTube channel at Locked On White Sox if you've not done so already, and also follow or subscribe to the show at wherever you get your podcasts. Well, the White Sox have tied the Major League record for most losses in a 162-game season after being swept by the San Diego Padres. In the first segment, I wanted to discuss why this team should go down as the worst team ever. Then another former player has come forward to describe how the franchise is such a mess under Jerry Reinsdorf. And finally, it's Monday, so let's discuss where the hope is with a Minor League Monday report. And this episode is brought to you by Booking.com. Booking.yeah, that's the right stay can make you a fan of any city, even your baseball rivals. Book today on Booking.com, the official accommodation partner of Major League Baseball. Get the Booking.com app today. All right, so let me reinforce that the 2005 White Sox are officially the worst team in baseball, at least context-wise. If you're into semantics, if you're in literal, I had a little discussion with somebody in the comments over the weekend that says, well, the 1916 Philadelphia A's technically have the worst winning percentage ever, and the 1899 Cleveland Spiders, they only won 20 games. Fine. If you want to be literal, okay. The Sox are on their way. They're most likely going to break the 1916 Philadelphia A's, which I'll get into a second on that worst winning percentage. But the context behind the 62 Mets, the 1916 Philadelphia A's, even the 1899 Spiders shows why they were bad. The context behind the White Sox means this should have never have even happened to begin with. I mean, the Sox are so bad because of so many factors that in today's day and age should not be possible. That's the context we're missing. And I've discussed it with Rob Hart on previous episodes and some other folks that I've had on. This should never have even happened. And I really want to highlight that even the most diehard fan has to accept that the White Sox will have the distinction of having the worst team ever for all time, no matter what future success the team can have. And it will be all time, or it should be. It's going to be very, very hard to top what your 2024 Chicago White Sox have done. And context-wise, the worst team of all time, again, should be applied to them for one simple reason. This should not happen in the year of our Lord, 2024. I mean, think about the context. The Mets set the 120 losses record because they were an expansion team. The 1916 Philadelphia A's had the worst winning percentage ever in the modern era because they were teetering on bankruptcy, typically. I mean, Connie Mack was not a very wealthy man. The 1899 Spiders were bad because their owner owned another team, and he wanted all the best players on that team. So the Spiders were kind of like a minor league club for his other club that just happened to play professional baseball at I think it was the American League at that time. And they also, I believe, folded after that season. So there's context there. The Sox are historically awful because the owner's in a time warp where he still thinks it's 1992 and players should be played like it's in the 1950s. The 2024 White Sox became historically bad for reasons that just should not happen in modern baseball. It's not being built from scratch like the 62 Mets. The team has access to planes to scout prospects. Now, granted, it might be an Airbus, but hey, it's still a plane. There's endless showcases to watch these prospects. And there's this thing called the internet and better stat keeping in today's day and age than what the Philadelphia A's had to deal with. I mean, the Philadelphia A's didn't have the help, in 1916 of planes and internet and player showcases. They were sometimes, constricted to who was in the area. It was very hard for a lot of teams to just branch out to find players. Some teams even only had like one or two scouts. The Sox should have an army, and yet they're still behind the times. And oh yeah, the Sox, they have a television contract and an owner who's worth $2 billion that should at least afford them the luxury of putting together a team that can say win 61 games. Did it last year. And I can't believe I've got to say, man, it would be nice if the Sox would have won 61 games. That's just how bad things have gotten. But the Sox are not teetering on the verge of bankruptcy. And none of that, Major League Baseball would probably make sure that they wouldn't fold. I mean, they've got that now. Jerry owns the Bulls, and the last time I checked, though, he isn't sending anyone from the White Sox to play there. So the context behind the Spiders, for example, behind the Philadelphia A's in 1916. And by the way, why am I still talking about a team that played before the U.S. even entered World War I? I shouldn't be doing that. That's the other reason. I should not be comparing a team in 2024 to a team that played over 108 years ago. 108 years should have been erased from context the moment the Cubs won the World Series in 2016. And yet here we are. And the Sox got to this point because of just their own dumb thinking, their own outdated thinking, foolishly thinking that Yohan Moncada, Luis Robert Jr., and Eloy Jimenez could stay healthy, and then Andrew Vaughn and Andrew Benintendi could play better than replacement level. That would be the foundation of your offense. That's foolish. That's almost insane thinking, because they saw the same thing in 2023, and they even brought in Andrew Benintendi. Thinking Moncada, Robert Jr., and Jimenez can stay healthy is like me thinking Taylor Swift and Scarlett Johansson are going to show up at my front door after the show. It's wishful thinking, but it's not going to happen. So it was built on a shaky foundation and then crumbled in April and was just left with the two Andrews, who were terrible for most of the first half. So that already put you in a hole. I mean, think about it. The Sox literally ran out of lineup for most of April, May, and June with Martin Maldonado in it, whose numbers indicated he was an automatic out. And at one point, they had Paul DeYoung, who wasn't even hitting homers, and Nicky Lopez, who just wasn't hitting, period. They had 3 automatic outs in that lineup. Oh, and then 5, because Andrew Benintendi was the worst hitter among all qualified in OPS before he went on the IL, and Andrew Vaughn, who was struggling mightily, who was mired in a 2-month season slump. So think about that. They ran out of lineup that half the time had 4 or 5 automatic outs. And I believe at one point they were just running out of lineup that had Tommy Pham, and that was it. And veteran Tommy Pham, speaking of that, he confirmed the game planning on defensive player positioning was poor. I mean, think about it. The Sox should actually have the technology and the data and the analytics to tell their defensive players where to be for each hitter to get outs. Technology that was not available in 1899, not available in 1916, not even available in 1962. And think about it. The goal was to improve the teams defensively. We're going to be, the thought was they're going to be very run prevention heavy, and they were still one of the worst defenses in all of baseball. And the goal was to improve the clubhouse culture, because that would make things better. And while everyone seems to get along, they're losing while getting along. Great. Some of the best teams in history hated each other, but they found a way to win when it was game time. I mean, think about it. The 1962-16 Philadelphia A's moved to Kansas City and then moved to Oakland. And they won 3 straight World Series with players that hated each other. And there was no accountability. Pedro Grifol was allowed to manage all the way through until August. And last time I checked, he was not a legendary manager like Casey Stengel, where you're like, okay, just let the guy manage throughout the entire year, because at least he was a good soundbite. You had Pedro Grifol, who had the personality of a porcupine walking on sandpaper. And he was allowed to manage all the way through until early August, despite being tactically in over his head. And hardly anyone got benched for struggling. And you had the old excuse, well, who else could they run out there? Who else could do better? I would have rather tried something rather than do nothing, because it led to this. And when the team did try to do something, it was too late. Firing Pedro Grifol, too late. DFAing Martina Maldonado, too late. DFAing John Brebbia, even Tim Hill, too late. The Pythagorean win-loss. The Sox right now should have 44 wins. And 112 losses. So that would be the same amount of losses that the 1916 Philadelphia A's had. So they're still not better. And the 62 Mets, their Pythagorean win-loss was 50 and 110. So even if the luck went the Sox way a bit, the 62 Mets still would have been better. And losing streaks, the Sox have had 3 double-digit ones, which was rarely heard of. And the 62 Mets longest was 17. The 16 A's was 20. So the Sox topped them with an AL record tying 21 straight losses. The only thing the 62 Mets have that the Sox have not topped yet is blown leads. The 62 Mets had 64 blown leads. The Sox had 56. And think about it. 48 of those leads have been blown by the bullpen. 48! You don't blow even half of them. You're not even in this position. That's the thing. They even shot themselves in their own foot. And it's fitting that the Sox tied the record yesterday by blowing not one, but 2 leads and were swept for the 24th time this year. But at least they're trying to now roll out players that need hitting, that need at-bats. That's what interim manager Grady Sizemore is saying, that, he's now focused on getting guys that are going to be part of the 2025 team at bats. And that's the other reason the Sox just kept rolling out these bad veterans even after the trade deadline. I would have no problem if they were still at 120 losses had Brian Ramos been called up on August 1st. Had Brooks Baldwin also been given the chance immediately. Had Dominic Fletcher never have been sent down to AAA to begin with. Had they just been rolling out younger guys, that would have been acceptable because it would have been part of the learning process. Instead, they had to lose games with Chris Flexen and Martin Maldonado and John Brebbia blowing leads. And again, there's no silver lining of the top pick at the end of the season. There's no Ethan Holiday on the horizon to be the team's version of Bobby Witt Jr. Because throw out turning things around quickly like last year's Kansas City Royals. I hate that when people are doing that because the Sox don't have that dude like Bobby Witt Jr. to build around, nor will they ever spend even a fraction of what the Royals spent. And the Royals, remember, are a cost-conscious team. They're not going to even spend a fraction of what they did last year to turn things around. Well, former pitcher Jake Peavy gave another damaging inside look into how dysfunctional things were for the Sox as far back as 12 years ago. Let's discuss his comments next on Locked On White Sox. And this episode of Locked On White Sox is brought to you by Booking.com. Booking.yeah. With hotels, bed and breakfast, vacation rentals, resorts, and so much more on Booking.com, you just might find your perfect stay even in your baseball rival city during the postseason. Hey, help root against the Cleveland Guardians and all their success in the AL Central live and in person, and use Booking.com to get a place to stay, say, near the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. And you and I have suffered through a long season. Maybe you want to watch some good baseball with the Brewers in the playoffs. Hey, take a trip up I-94 North, book a stay with Booking.com, get a ticket to the game, eat abroad at a tailgate, or better yet, stop at Sobelman's, get a Sobelman's burger and their world-famous Bloody Marys. Booking.com can help you book a stay that's close to your home teams or rival stadium. No matter what team you're rooting for this postseason, Booking.com can make you a fan of any U.S. city, from hotels that overlook stadiums to family-friendly resorts to cute bed and breakfast stays. Booking.com has so many choices across the U.S. The right stay can make you a fan of any U.S. city, even your baseball rivals. Booking.com, Booking.yeah. Hey, NFL fans, you can start the season with a big return on FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. So when you get a hunch in the middle of the game, you can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more on the same page where you place your bets. You'll get started with $200 in bonus bets guaranteed when you place your first $5 bet. And I always maintain FanDuel is outstanding for props, futures, and parlays. FanDuel is always good for traditional stuff too, like the over-under and the money line, but the props and the futures is where your experience with FanDuel is enhanced. The Guardians, Jose Ramirez, he's a couple of home runs away from 40-40. And if you put $10 on him joining it at plus 900, that can yield $90. And say you think the Baltimore Orioles are going to win the World Series, they're at plus 950. So that means $10 yields $95 if you hit on it. That's FanDuel.com. The White Sox are off today and then start a 3-game home set with the Los Angeles Angels tomorrow. The first pitch tomorrow is at 6:40 p.m. Central Standard Time. Catch every pitch of the White Sox hometown broadcast with SiriusXM on the SXM app. Search White Sox. And welcome back to Locked On White Sox. I am your host, Todd Welter. Make sure to hit the like button on today's episode and subscribe to the YouTube channel at Locked On White Sox if you've not done so already. And if you can't catch the show on YouTube, follow or subscribe to the show at wherever you get your podcasts, as Locked On White Sox is available at places such as Apple and Spotify. Hey, I'd like to think, with the leaves falling, I'd be a great companion while you're, raking or leaf blowing. And obviously, if you're sitting in traffic on the Kennedy, I'm your guy. Hopefully my dulcet tones are soothing, or at least reinforcing to why you're feeling all that road rage, especially if you're a White Sox fan, because you have to live in a world where now your team is the worst team ever in Major League Baseball. And you're going to have to accept that. I'm sorry. For those that have accepted it, I'm glad you're with me. For those that are still doing the mental gymnastics, stop. Just stop. You're not going to be able to, Simone Biles your way out of that. I'm sorry. They're the worst team ever. All right. So Jake Peavy spoke recently to RG.org. That's Responsible Gamblers recently. And he explains the Sox are in this historic mess because the organization just did not evolve. His comments echo the Athletic piece that I discussed on Friday's show. He summed up the Sox problem in one key phrase, as he said, quote, the situation was always in charge, end quote. I mean, that's just so perfect for the White Sox. The situation was in charge. The picture he paints of the Sox organization a decade ago and it never being fixed is showing how this season was the end result of so much chaos and outdated thinking within the Sox front office. And I want to cover a few damaging comments he made that really just shows how bad things were and how that ends up in the big picture, resulting in this season. So, quote, I do not want to throw people under the bus, Peavy said in an extensive and wide-ranging exclusive conversation with RG.org, but it's just been a very slow to change and evolve organization, and for a little bit, it doesn't seem to bite you in the butt. But after years and years and years and years of you not evolving with the rest of what the sport is doing, until you wake up one day with what you thought was a little problem, now you end up with a glaring hole, end quote. He also talks about internal strife. That was a huge issue. Quote, when I was there, Kenny Williams and Ozzie Guillen, our general manager, couldn't be in the same room. I love all those people. All those people are wonderful, but Herm Schneider got to stay in charge of the club's medical training staff long after the rest of the world of training staff and training rooms and PT and massage therapists, all that stuff was coming on the scene. And everybody was evolving, and analytics and science was making its way in, and the White Sox were doing none of that. End quote. Peavy went on to describe the Sox as a ball club with lots of people who are seemingly never on the same page. Quote, you look at Alan Thomas, strength and conditioning coach. There was not a cohesive plan between Herm Schneider, the training staff, and the strength staff. Herm disliked what was going on in the weight room. Pitching coach Don Cooper ran every bit of the pitching, where Ozzie didn't really do anything with pitchers. Base coach Joey Cora kind of made the lineup while Ozzie talked to the media and just kind of sat above everybody's heads. Ozzie thought he was in charge. Joey thought he was in charge. Coop thinks he's in charge. Herm Schneider thinks he's in charge. Him and Jerry are best friends, and he really trumps anybody in that room. Then you have a manager in Ozzie who can't speak to Kenny Williams, can't even be in the same room. You're at a huge disadvantage, and we were just like that for years, and that was just since I was there. End quote. Holy cow. I mean, think about it. Herm Schneider, who does deserve a lot of credit for getting Bo Jackson back on the field in the 90s, had huge influence, obviously. Your team's trainer had more power than the general manager, it sounds like. No wonder why this team is decayed. No wonder why, even when you get something good, it just falls apart. Although the only thing is, now, Paul Banks deserves an award for doing this interview, and his write-up is fantastic. It's a masterpiece. The only thing he got wrong was calling Jake Peavy an ace. He was an ace when he was in San Diego, but he wasn't an ace with the White Sox. So, anyways, deserves an award for this. While Reinsdorf doesn't play Moneyball, i.e. trying to maximize the return on investment and cost-effective players, he doesn't spend much on free agents either. It's the worst of both worlds approach. There are only 2 major league clubs that have never spent $100 million or more on a single player contract. The White Sox have never even topped $80 million, as Andrew Benintendi's $75 million deal from December of 2022 is the richest player deal in Sox history. Only the Athletics are lower, as Eric Chavez's $66 million contract is the most cash that Oakland ever splashed. However, it's grossly unfair comparison. That deal was signed in 2004, and when you adjust the Chavez contract for inflation, it's now well worth over $110 million. However, there's still going more on here than palace intrigue, major internal strife, stubbornness, or to adapt and spending limits. You don't break a record for losses unless multiple major factors are going against you. Oh my God. I mean, first of all, that just paints the picture of Jerry Reinsdorf. He's a terrible businessman, then, in my opinion, because the whole point of Moneyball is you get cost-effective players. Yes, you have to invest in player development and scouting, and there's costs that go involved in that, but those costs are way lower than, say, signing Shohei Ohtani to $700 million contract, the player that Jerry laughed at, going after him. And that if you get the winning at a cost-effective price, guess what? You should probably get profit because people show up. Look at the San Diego Padres. 3 million people have come through the turnstiles. Everybody's been slamming the Padres for spending money in a small market, and they're probably going to lose. They slammed them last year. Well, they turned things around because they spent money. They developed their own players. And guess what? Fans come out. They buy tickets. They buy merchandise. They turn on the TV, which jacks up your ad revenue. Anyways, getting back to Peavy's comments, he summed up how things were led with the White Sox. This is what the article writes. He described one specific incident with the New York Yankees during a road game. The visiting clubhouse manager became highly frustrated by the lack of communication and organization within the Sox clubhouse as he tried to procure the tickets that players wanted to distribute to their people. Quote, "It was a bleep show, typical day on the road on the South Side," Peavy explained. And again, I love Danny Katzen, the ticket guy, so I'm not in any way disparaging the people. And Lou, the clubhouse manager, goes, Jesus Christ, who's in charge here? So I go, Lou, the situation's in charge. When you're hanging out around here, what's up? What do you need? I'll point you in the right direction. I'll tell you this. I can send you to 5 different people who will make the decision, whether they actually can or can't, end quote. The situation is in charge seems to be so fitting. Think about it. The situation of Jerry Reinsdorf regretting firing Tony La Russa in the 80s led to the owner hijacking the manager hiring process in 2021 and rehiring La Russa, which in end started to hijack the competitive window. The situation of not spending enough money to put the team over the top during that contention window also led to just one playoff win. The situation of bringing in bad clubhouse guys like Yasmani Grandal and Dallas Keuchel led to a toxic locker room. The situation of Pedro Grifol led to this team being poorly led. The situation of Jerry's loyalty and laziness led to him promoting Chris Getz instead of interviewing a single qualified candidate. The situation of Jerry still owning this team when he should have sold it after 2005 has led to this historic moment of all awfulness. All right, so enough with the bad. Let's talk about some hope, and it's Monday, so let's do our traditional Minor League Monday report next on Locked On White Sox. PrizePicks is America's daily #1 fantasy sports app with over 5 million active members. PrizePicks is the easiest and most exciting way to play daily fantasy sports, and unlike other apps, on PrizePicks, it's just you against the numbers. All you do is pick more or less on 2 to 6 player stat projections and watch the winnings roll in. One Caleb Williams passing yard gets you 1 win on PrizePicks every week in September. That's right, only 1 yard gets you an automatic win next Sunday. Last week for a free W. Don't miss this deal on PrizePicks because it's gone when September ends. And PrizePicks is the best way to get in on action on sports in most states, including Illinois, Indiana, and Wisconsin. And I always tell you about my buddy on the text chain who lives just a little bit behind that cheddar curtain. Some Sundays, instead of having to drive a half hour over the border to get his selections in, he can just roll out of bed and use PrizePicks. I love PrizePicks for how simple and easy it is to play. Download the PrizePicks app today and use code LOCKEDONMLB and get $50 instantly when you play $5. That's code LOCKEDONMLB on PrizePicks to get $50 instantly when you play $5. You don't even need to win to receive the $50 bonus. It's guaranteed. PrizePicks, run your game. And the White Sox are off today and then start a 3-game home set tomorrow with the Los Angeles Angels. The first pitch is at 6:40 p.m. Central Standard Time. Catch every pitch of the White Sox hometown broadcast with the SiriusXM on the SXM app. Search White Sox. And welcome back into Locked On White Sox. I am your host, Todd Welter. Shout out to all my everydayers. Hope you guys had a good weekend. Mine was all right. Just did a few errands. My daughter, had some of her things going on, but otherwise nothing too exciting. Not happy with the Chicago Bear game, and them losing, but hey, Caleb Williams, 363 yards, got to be encouraged. I have to keep reminding myself, I have to be patient with Caleb. I don't have to be happy with Matt Eberflus. Those two things can be true at the same time. And I can also be very excited by Caleb Williams. Those three things can be true at the same time. All right. So the Chicago White Sox have a championship team. It's just at AA Birmingham. That's the biggest news from the Sox farm system, last week, as the Barons won their playoff series and advanced to the Southern League Championship. And now it is nice to see winning at the minor league level, but individual play is more important, as most of these players will never make it to the bigs, or they'll just be trade bait. But hey, any chance the Barons can give Noah Schultz a chance to make another start is fine by me. And he pitched game 1 of the playoff series against Montgomery and showed once again, it is hard to touch his stuff. As a Sox top pitching prospect, basically he gave up no runs. I don't think he really gave up a hit, because I was able to tune in and watch. Like, first time I've really actually been able to tune into a Barons game, and there's Noah Schultz pitching. But he did show he can get himself in and out of trouble, which is very, very encouraging, because it's not like he's never going to give up any hits or walks once he gets to the major league level. But in the third, he allowed a walk, and he had a hit by pitch, and then there's a double steal. So, guys at second and third, 2 outs, but he calmly gets the next hitter out on a very impressive high heater. It was like, whoop! It was impressive. Now, I have a feeling, again, he's going to give up some hits in the big leagues, but man, you see his stuff working on some days, and you're like, the only hitters getting on base is if he lets them on. His stuff is that good where you think, man, good luck touching him. And I'll keep saying it, but I love the development plan the Sox have had for him this year. 4 innings once a week allows him to preserve his arm and those limited bullets it has in him. And then hopefully in the offseason, he works on being able to pitch deeper into games, getting stronger. And then you get him some starts at AA next year. Start at AA, not AAA, because, it's a bandbox. And also, keep him comfortable, and get him pitching a little bit longer. And then hopefully he's ready to go by July or August to be on the big league roster. And there are a couple of players still at AA Birmingham that I'm hopeful could also help the Sox bullpen midway through even next season. Juan Cariola, sorry about that. He came over from the Yankees last year in the Kenyon Middleton trade. He's been starting, and he has an ERA under 4. And the times that I've turned on the Barons games, he's looked very impressive with this stuff. I think he probably would be more of a bullpen guy. So that's why I'm encouraged by him. And Peyton Polite, former second-round pick, didn't really work out as a starter, gets moved to the bullpen, and man, he just keeps getting out. So you kind of like what they have there. Rico Nishida, hopefully I pronounce his name correctly. He's got no pop, but I love his swing and his approach, as I can see him being an old-school leadoff hitter. He's an undersized second baseman and outfielder, but his swing is so reminiscent of Ichiro. I'm not saying he's going to be Ichiro, but it's very reminiscent of it. That, kind of that swing where it's made for contact, and it's also, he's got great plate discipline, 418 on base percentage. That's why I'm very intrigued by him. I know he's not highly ranked yet. I know Future Sox and MLB Pipeline doesn't have him in the top 30, but you just look at this guy and he's like, man, great bat to ball skills, great on base percentage. Has a 400 OBP in his last 11 games. And the Barons winning a series against the Smokies speaks to the improving farm system depth, at least, because the Barons got to the playoffs winning the first half with the best rotation probably in the minors at the time. They had Drew Thorpe, Jake Etter, Jairo Iriarte, Kai Bush, Mason Adams, and Schultz. And only Schultz is left. And then lineup-wise, a couple of their best hitters, Edgar Caro and Tim Elko, they got promoted to AAA. And by the way, Caro is with the Sox right now and could make his debut as soon as tomorrow. And also Elko, man, he is so underrated. I would like to see him get some at-bats in the final 6 games. I know it's not going to happen because they'd have to make a move. But, he's just been very underrated. But you think about the lineup that they've had, that like their mainstays, Jacob Gonzalez and Wilfred Veras, they're the team, in the team's top 30, and they've been there for most of the season. But Gonzalez has struggled. Last year's number 1 pick, he struggled. But he did have a bases clearing double to break yesterday's game wide open. And I know Veras had a few injuries, and again, he might just be a utility player. But here they are playing for a championship. So at least that speaks to the depth that the Sox have, and maybe that their player development system is going good. AAA Charlotte season is over, and that means top hitting prospects Colson Montgomery's miserable 2024 season is over. He finishes with a 214, 329, 381 slash line. He did hit 18 home runs, but that 710 OPS is obviously disappointing, especially since it'll drop by, I think, 100 points from last year. But at least he can show he can hit for power, and the Sox do need power at some point in the lineup next year. But what they need for him to work on in the offseason, or at least in the first half at Charlotte, is that he should start hitting velocity and hitting against righties. He had a 201 average against righties, although his slugging was 384 versus 376 against lefties. And again, that's not a very good slugging percentage to begin with, but at least when he did touch righties, he crushed it a little bit more. So you want him to be able to hit against righties better and hit velocity. And he did finish strong with a 264 average, 814 OPS, including a 458 slugging percentage and 4 dingers in September. So maybe that's a sign of things starting to click. I would still roll with Brooks Baldwin and Amaya at shortstop to start the season next year, since ideally this should have been the year Montgomery was still at AA, at least for half of it. You know, I've had guys on from Future Sox talking about that he probably got rushed to AAA. And then, give him another couple, maybe some more at bats at AAA Charlotte, bring up Montgomery in, say, June, unless he's really mashing in spring training or early on, but just give him a little bit more time, because again, that September, those numbers are encouraging to see that maybe he can still be a very good baseball player. I don't think he's going to be a Corey Seager superstar, but if he can even be just a home run hitting 264 shortstop, that's better than what you got. And that is a sign of they do need to get good players still in there. If he can be a 1 to 2 F4 player, 2 F4 player, that would be fantastic. All right. Well, this wraps up this edition of Locked On White Sox. Thank you for making Locked On White Sox your first listen today. For your second listen, find Locked On MLB. Prepare for the Fall Classic with Sully, who has it covered every single day. Find Locked On MLB on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts. I'll be back tomorrow with Baseball Isn't Boring's Courtney Finacum to discuss the Sox historic losing, as she's been actually traveling to other parks when the Sox are there and when the Sox are, on road trips. She's also been to obviously a couple of games. She's very in tune to what the White Sox are doing. She's got great takes on X, formerly Twitter, and I wanted to get her on for that too. So she'll be on tomorrow. Wednesday show, I want to share your takes on this historically bad season. So feel free to leave comments about that and today's topics at the episode page on YouTube, X, formerly Twitter, at Todd J. Dub, or at Locked On Sox, or email me at LockedOnWhiteSox@gmail.com. Have a great day. Talk to you tomorrow.